This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 10:08 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. You're on Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Loeb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast. And welcome to a warm Friday morning.
Oh, is it?
On the Treasure Coast. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Now, the car that I drive, I got actually in Tucson, and it has on board, as many cars do today, a thermometer, and it's typically a degree or two warmer than outside, but the numbers it's been showing me, coupled with Florida humidity, has been noticeable. I'll put it that way. So, yeah.
Yeah, mine's been over 110 showing outside. It's like, wow.
Well, that's sun, too.
Yeah, after it's sitting
it cools.
here for a
It
full
cools
day.
off when you get on the road, and the real air hits it.
Sure.
And so you get the same thing, that the car effect of a couple degrees.
You know, it's so funny. It's like I see these stories, and every network is going ballistic about Phoenix. And I understand it's a lot of days, but when you were living in Tucson, when I was living in Tucson, it could be a solid month of over 100 in Phoenix. It was all the time.
It's always been hot in Phoenix.
Come on,
Now, Phoenix has aggravated it.
Oh,
absolutely, by the concrete. The amount of
city.
concrete in that city is phenomenal. And I can tell you, there's a time I remember coming out. I would gone to Phoenix for, I think actually a jazzercise event, and I was coming home with a friend of mine, and we could feel the temperature decrease as we went toward Tucson.
Well, and you're also going uphill.
Yeah, that's
you
not
can't see it. But
you can't see it. That's not as obvious, but you could definitely feel the temperature coming down. So that was it was a good 10 or 15 degrees cooler.
Oh yeah.
In Tucson. Now, I will say that it was summer, and it was warm. We watched a haboob go toward Phoenix. I'm not quite sure where it went. I'm just glad it didn't come across the road. And because we were in my friend's convertible, actually, and it was open. And there's a funny piece to that, which is that we pulled off of the I-10, just in Tucson. And as we're stopping at the light, I was driving the car. She had me driving the car. And I asked her how long it took for the roof to come up because the skies were looking ominous. And she said, it takes 60 seconds or something like that. And I said, well, we're going to do it on this red light. And I hit the button because you can't do it when you're moving. And so I started the hood coming. And I said, if the light changes, we'll just gently coast to the edge and let it finish. But it just came up, and it wasn't closed more than 10 seconds before it went kaboom.
Wham!
And the world opened up on us, and it rained all the way home. So I am so glad for her car and for the two of us that the roof went up. It was a hardtop convertible.
Yep.
So it took a while to go.
Sure. And this had to be in the afternoon, right?
Yeah, it had to be because the event had been earlier. That's back in the days when I could jazzercise. I miss that. I miss that a lot. I live not almost walking distance, but not quite from a jazzercise center.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I miss that. I miss that so much. I love jazzing.
Well, they probably have that at like the Port St. Lucie Community Center or something.
Like in Stewart.
Oh, okay. Oh, you've already researched
I've
it.
researched it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so it's not that easy to, It was a commitment for an hour. The jazzercise class runs an hour, and then, of course, you've got to get ready before it because you get dressed for it because you don't wear street clothes in a jazz session. And then you're sweaty, so you come home and you shower. So by the time I do that with Stewart, it would be a 2 to 3 hour event. that's a little harder to squeeze into my crazy schedule.
Yeah, you are busy.
I am just a tad busy. So.
What happened to the fella that you were working with on a doctoral thesis? I mean, how long does it take the school to let him know that he's got it?
Oh, the one that I was talking about, he's done. He finished, and he just got a postdoc offer from, I'm not sure which, it might be U of P in Philadelphia.
Oh, Penn?
So, yeah, I think it's Penn.
Whoa.
Yeah, this kid is
Ivy League.
Brilliant. Yeah,
Ivy League.
This kid is brilliant. Well, it was the University of Dayton where he got his degree.
Okay.
And it's he's in a very specialized field of composite manufacturing, additive manufacturing, which is 3D printing.
Oh, I was going to say, what
Yeah.
are you talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So he's in a very specialized section, and there's a lot of interest in what he's doing because he's doing very hard to manufacture parts.
They were talking, I forget where I saw it, 60 Minutes or something, where they were looking at building a 3D building in San Francisco
Wow.
that was flexible enough
To survive
handle-
earthquakes.
handle an earthquake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of interest in what the differences in what you can do with printing. It's just huge. And
Wow.
the different substances that you can use and what's compatible with what's not. And he gets into all of that. So, yeah.
Wow.
I wish him the best of luck. I've talked with him since. I've done a little bit of help for him on journals and things, journal articles that he's now in the process of writing.
Nice.
So, yeah.
He's a brainiac.
Yeah,
then.
he is
Wow.
kind of. And
Wow.
I love working with doctoral students. It's a lot of fun, and I learn a lot because I get to read their dissertations. So I learn quite a bit about many different subjects. And my crazy widespread interests gets fed that way, if you will.
Well, and you to say that you have varied interests would be the biggest understatement in the world.
I've done a few things, and
Yeah,
I
just a few.
enjoy crazy different things. So I enjoy one of my habits that people have noticed when I attend a meeting. I'm very often either drawing something, or I'm doing a small diamond painting, like little coasters or something like that. So I'm always doing something. That's one of my crazinesses. And I had an interesting event yesterday, and I'm going to piggyback off of it, but I actually had to kick my students out of my class at Kaiser. The class goes until 4:30, and at 5:30 they were still in there having the discussion and continuing to work. And I usually will humor that, but this one had gone on and another class was going to be in the room at 6, so
Whoa.
we had to get out of the room.
Uh-oh.
And so I finally said to them, you need to get home. It's the rain is we could see the rain clouds in the window. I'm like, get yourselves out into your car before the rains come. It's time to go home. But I've had students hang over a few minutes to want to finish something or discuss something. But this was probably the first time that it went an hour. Yeah. So
was the discussion lively?
It was very lively, and it was the general topic, which is one of my specialties, is trauma and cognition, how trauma affects our abilities to think, to reason, to cope. The hardest part with trauma is healing to develop resiliency. And there are too many people in the world who think that because you've had trauma that you no longer can develop resiliency. But that's not true. Resiliency is not something you're necessarily born with. It's not something that you necessarily were gifted with in childhood or in early adulthood. It is something you can learn and develop anywhere along the line, no matter how much trauma you've faced, but you have to be willing to do the work. And it is work. It's inner work, and it's difficult. The problem with trauma, the problem with coping and healing from trauma, if you will. Trauma is defined as any event experienced or witnessed or listened to about violence or catastrophe or any of that sort of thing, something that shocks the system at a very deep level and overwhelms the brain in the moment. And so I can remember one time actually being traumatized driving my car. I remember this one very distinctly in Pittsburgh, of crazy places. And there had been a car accident on the other side. I was going, I must have been going west. I don't know. I was coming out of Pittsburgh. I'd been at U of Pitt rather, and I was coming home after classes, and there'd been this huge accident, and there were two cars flipped on their backs, and the first responders were trying to get the people out of those cars. So I didn't see the accident, but I saw the aftermath. I didn't see the collision. I saw the aftermath. And I drove on. Traffic was just, I'm sure there was slowdown for rubbernecking because people do that. But as I continued driving, I started shaking and having a tremendous response to the potential of what that accident represented.
Oh, yeah.
That was the trauma for me. So I didn't have to be in the accident. I witnessed it. And I came home and I was still shaking. So that was a good 5 or 10 minutes of driving, and I'm still shaking and I'm still having trouble forming words because I was able to drive home. But I was so impacted by the threat of an accident like that. And so trauma is an interesting thing because we never know who's exposed to what. And fortunately, my parents were able to just calm me down when I got home. And, well, I should say my mother, not my parents. My father was already deceased. But my mother calmed me down. She was very good at that. And, I was able to start to cope with it. And she helped me reframe what I had seen. She wasn't trained to do that. It was just her natural instinct to do it.
Being a mom, yeah.
Yeah, it was being a mom.
Yeah.
It was being a mom, and it was being a Holocaust survivor.
Oh.
She had learned to cope with things and to compartmentalize. And so because of all that, it wasn't a long lasting, but obviously I still remember it in very vivid, right? So a trauma very often puts a huge imprint. And many people will not want to talk about the trauma because when you talk about it, there's a couple of things that happen when you talk about trauma. One, you relive it, which is part of the problem in getting rape victims to testify. You are forcing them to relive the rape on the stand in front of people. And that's very, very debilitating.
Yeah.
Humiliating. It does not leave the person feeling whole and clean.
And we saw that with a whole different situation with the world's greatest generation and World War II. And where those soldiers
didn't want to talk about it.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And Holocaust survivors for a long time
I'm
didn't
sure.
want to talk about it. And then they finally, some of them woke up and realized that nobody was listening because they hadn't talked about it. And so
it didn't exist.
So it didn't exist.
Oh God.
And so there's many so that's an invalidation of their trauma, which is even worse. So it all cascades, and so people are reluctant to do the work because of the pain of visiting those places. And the talking about it is very often part of processing it. You can start to realize that just like that accident, I had done nothing other than drive by. So there wasn't anything that I did, and that was part of the trauma, was the realizing that there wasn't anything I could do. If that accident had occurred around me, I'd have been in it. Whether I'd done anything right or wrong, I'd have been in that accident, and who knows if I'd have come out of it. And that's shattering at some levels. So the other part of trauma is that the person who hears that story also gets traumatized. It's called secondary trauma.
Well, and
secondary or tertiary.
I think I had mine when I was at the Ambassador Hotel when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was a large ballroom, but I mean, obviously we could all hear the shots.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in the back in the press area. And
you weren't that far from it.
no, what a horrible night.
And you easily could have been next to him if you had been lucky enough to be chosen to interview him in that time, or to tag along, because press gets picked somewhat randomly, somewhat not.
Yeah.
Oh, we won't go there. But
Yeah, my memory of him was incredible. We were around Portland, and I was sitting in a row, and I was very fortunate to go on his West Coast swing. And all of a sudden, there's this tap on the shoulder, and it was Bobby, and he goes, "Hi, I'm Bobby Kennedy. Do you want to talk to me?" And I said, "I'd love to." And the guy sitting next to me was a 9,000-year-old New York Times guy, and he just goes, and some more political pablum, you know. And then I climbed over him with my little tape recorder. Somewhere in this station
is that recording? Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's, of course, we don't have tape anymore. But, you know, I just think, oh, my gosh.
But you still have a tape player somewhere tucked away, I'm sure.
I probably don't. I probably don't.
Okay, well, then probably on Swap Shop somebody does.
Yeah, that's right.
There you go. Just have to go down through.
Oh, my gosh, yeah. But, yeah, and, you know, I could see the event right now.
Wow. So, you know, yeah, and I think of like Gabby Giffords, right?
Oh,
9 people are killed, and the only reason they were killed is they came out to see Meet Your Congressman.
Yeah.
Right. Meet Your Congressperson, I guess I should say. And, you know, one of them is a 9-year-old girl brought by her neighbor so that she start to have some civic exposure. Yeah. And, you know, the only thing was you just happened to have been where somebody wanted to shoot somebody.
And she was a grandchild of a former baseball player who I know very well.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean...
The world is small.
It is small.
Yeah.
It is very small. But, yeah, trauma is amazing. And you know, going to a lot of funerals when I was at Loyola of a lot of my high school chums that died in Vietnam.
Oh, yeah. Vietnam is national trauma, and I say that, and as is Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah.
Right. So there are many areas where we are not at war but at war that create all kinds of trauma. So not only the PTSD, which we used to call shell shock, with which soldiers and sailors and airmen and corpsmen, I guess persons, come back with. And that was actually part of the discussion, was that people were sharing bits and pieces about their traumas without getting very specific, but just talking about the traumas and the work of recognizing that trauma happens around us and it's not our fault. It's not our fault that we can't cope with it, that we can't control the world, that we can't manage everything in our environment in the moment. Things happen. And it takes stepping away and forgiving yourself for being human, for nothing more than being human in the course of an event.
Nothing wrong about being human.
There is nothing wrong. But people will blame themselves over and over again that they didn't become Superman in the moment, or Superwoman, or Batman, or Batwoman, or somebody to save the day. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes there's somebody who's in the right place at the right time to do something, but often there's not. Often there's not. And there's a really wonderful scene. I'm going to go back to an old movie called Good Will Hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And which has got a nice star-studded cast. And there's a great scene in it where Will is confronting having been beaten as a child in a foster setting. He's a kid who gets into the system, and one of the foster parents is just horribly abusive, drunk, and they document the damage on this child's body.
Oh.
And Robin Williams plays the psychologist in it, which is why we talk about it in class. But there's a scene there where they're talking about the beatings that he had had as a child, and he references the pictures and says that's not discipline, that's abuse. And then says to the kid, to Will, it's not your fault. And Will says, yeah, I know. He says, no, it's not your fault. Yeah, I know. And this goes on back and forth about 5 or 6 times until finally it penetrates. And that's all that Robin Williams keeps saying to him is, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Until it penetrates, and then the kid in Will breaks down. And they have a moment there where he actually gets it that, yeah, maybe I was just a kid in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it happens. I hear music. So let's flip that to the other subject of the day, which is that it's bloomin' hot out there. And yes, it's always bloomin' hot in Phoenix. And they now have it where they're not allowing you to put grass in your front yard in Phoenix, in new homes. Finally, it's about time that they've required xeriscape. And that's, you can look that up, folks, xeriscape. It's not zero, it's xeriscape. And that means minimum water usage. Because green grass takes water. And Phoenix uses a ton of water to water their lawns.
Oh, yeah, a lot of golf courses and you name it. Yeah.
You know, much better than that would be putting something green on your roof instead of having... That comes out of Biosphere, too. They've done some experimenting. And having roof gardens does an amazing job of cooling the house and not putting as much heat back out into the universe, out into the atmosphere. So it's really important, some roof gardens, things like that. And you're saying to me, well, that'll take water. And it does, but it doesn't take much if you do it correctly. So I've got seeds for Mexican bird of paradise, which does not take much water. It's very drought tolerant. I probably have a couple hundred seeds from my one little plant in the back who's just blooming its heart out. That's those big flashy orange flowers that you see on my Facebook. So
they are gorgeous.
They are an absolutely beautiful, beautiful plant and flower, and I love them. They're just. I was looking at that and trying to figure out exactly how and what I'm going to do to tame that plant because it's gotten just. I was looking at it today and it's a good 2 or 3 feet taller than me. So it and I are probably going to have some discussions in fall when I kind of take it back a little bit. But right now it's busy putting out seed pods, so I'm going to let it do that. Yeah, but the warmth, and it's loving the warmth. It doesn't care. But not everything's that way. The planet is suffering. And so we've also got a new and unique kind of trauma that's out there called climate trauma, which are the people who divide up into 2 lines. One group is scared to death of what's happening with the climate. They're convinced that Miami's going to be underwater next week. I don't think it's that fast, but certainly water levels are rising. And if we look all the way back to the Jurassic period, the dinosaurs, Florida was underwater at that time. It was a warmer time on the planet, and that's why we don't have dinosaur bones in Florida, because Florida wasn't above water at that time. So something to be aware of, that is real. The water levels are rising, and we see that in different parts of the world, more and more water coming in, where humans have moved closer to the water than perhaps they might want to. And seawalls coming up higher and higher.
Yeah, and during the dinosaur era, there was no Corps of Engineers to move the water.
And destroy the swamps.
And destroy
the river of grass, yes.
Oh, God.
That's a whole other set of trauma. Right? So that creates generational trauma.
Man-made
huge
trauma.
Yeah. Engineered trauma.
Yeah. Wow.
Let's destroy an ecosystem and its way of life.
Gosh. Yeah.
As you're up to your rear end in large lizards.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's amazing what we've done to ourselves. I mean, that's what, we're supposed to be reasonably intelligent.
We are, intelligent, but we don't always think of the consequences, and we don't know enough. Right. So look at the things we've done. We've put love bugs in. We've put melaleuca plants in the swamp. We've brought starlings from Europe because some guy wanted every bird that Shakespeare mentioned to be. Right. So now we've all got noisy starlings floating around, and you have the red-headed lizards in the parking lot now. They weren't here when I started doing the radio show. They weren't at my house when I started doing the radio show. I remember when they were at a gas station in Stewart, and I thought they were novel and interesting at that gas station. And now they're almost everywhere. They're making their way. They're increasing their range dramatically at the cost of the Aboriginal
Definitely
lizards.
invasive.
Very invasive. But the system is going to reestablish itself. I believe that. It's one of my colleagues talks about urban biosystems, and that's what we've done. We've modified the world, and it is changing it, and we're going to continue to do that. But we need to work it, as you said, intelligently. We need to use the skills we've got, and so that same climate trauma that has people terrified that big parts of the world are going to be underwater in a heartbeat, then there's the opposite reaction, which is the vehement denial of climate change effects, that is also a trauma coping mechanism called denial. Kubler-Ross wrote about the stages of grief, and they're not unlike the stages of trauma. So people do all those same things. They deny, they become angry, they go into shock. They do all those same things that we do with grief because losing a loved one is trauma. So it's reasonable that the responses, the coping mechanisms, are similar. And it's when we move our way toward what she calls acceptance, that doesn't mean that things go back to the way they were before. They won't. Traumas change the world and they change you, but you will go to a new, healthier place. And that is healing, that's coping, that's recovering, that's resilience. And that's important. The recognition that we're going to pick up the pieces, we're going to put them together in a way that can be beautiful. And as I say that, I think of the Japanese art of putting broken vessels back together, but putting gold inside the cracks and creating a new, beautiful piece of artwork that is, in its own way, more beautiful than the original vessel because they've embellished it. They've taken it, they've made it stronger, they've made it more ornate, they've made it more beautiful. And we can do that. We can take the lessons from the trauma and learn to use them in our lives in constructive ways, not destructive ways. And when we do that, then the traumas really do allow for something called trauma growth. And that's the challenge. How do we take the many, many traumas in our lives and learn to make them into something that makes us better and stronger, more compassionate, not defensive? Because defensive, while it is a coping easy for me to say, well, that's a coping mechanism, it's not a constructive one. That's the piece. Is it constructive? Is it helping you be a better person? Is it helping you learn how to be more compassionate? Is it teaching you how to help people avoid that trauma in the future or to cope with that trauma when it happens? And we as a group are getting better, and things will get better. I believe that. It's not going to happen overnight, and each generation has their own stuff to deal with. It's the way of life. We change, right? Our ancestors didn't have to worry about getting electrocuted because, unless they got struck by lightning, not going to have much electrical effect in their life before we have electricity. So as we improve our lives and modernize them, we also bring with it different potential traumas and different challenges and problems. We see now all kinds of cybercrime going on, where we used to see muggings. You don't see muggings much anymore because people don't have cash in their pockets.
Yeah, you can do it with their computers.
You do it with a computer. You do it with something that grabs the credit card information as you go by. And so now people are selling those special wallets that have the scan-proof technology on them. So we create new problems, and we create new solutions to those problems. It's just part of the system.
You know, you think about going into a crowd, and now some of these people that have these devices that can clone your phone just by being close.
There's all kinds of things.
Oh, that's scary. It's like, oh my goodness. Yeah.
There was a recent thing that some of the folks in the Treasure Coast have gotten a strange email from me for my service group, and it was talking about something going on in Washington, and please send gift cards, right? Which clearly I'm not going to request. And what the person had done is gone on the net and found out some of the public information about me, because there's a ton of it out there, and created a fake email at Gmail.
Sure.
And pretended to be me, and somehow got a hold of one of the rosters, I think, from a couple of organizations, and pretended to be me in that moment. And my comment to the people was, first of all, that's not how I sign my emails. So this person has clearly never been in my email, nor have they ever received an email from me. They're picking up, and they're making a guess as to who's connected to whom. They've clearly picked up one of the rosters, either at a state level or a local level, and scammed it.
Wow.
And if you think I talk like that, then you're not paying attention, because I don't do weird things like that.
Wow.
So 2 or 3 people said, these are strange emails. You better go in and change your... That's the other part that I get a kick out of. Oh, you better go in and change your password. And if they have... I've had my Amazon account and my email breached once. And Amazon, by the way, was wonderful about it. They handled it beautifully. They worked with me to give me back control of my account. They credited everything that had been ordered on it, and took off all the credit cards, which was a small pain, to make sure that, and they said for 3 days, don't do anything until we know that everything's secure, which I did. I gritted my teeth and didn't shop for 3 days. I survived. And I didn't have anything critical coming that I needed stuff. But they were very helpful in getting it back and giving me some good advice on how to not let it be exposed. And I'm guessing that I think they had hacked my email first and then went from the email to Amazon, which was their goal. And changed my password in my email, got everything cleared there. Thank you, Earthlink, for working with me on that. So I know what it is, and I know the difference. The other one is called, they're either phishing or they're spoofing. They're pretending to be you. And you have to be aware of it. And the thing that I always ask, and I don't know why it takes like 5 or 6 requests, to say to people, please send me a copy of the email. Forward me. Don't reply, because then you're replying to the dingbat. Reply to me, so I see. Mm-hmm. Forward it to me, so I can see, and I can get in this case, Gmail to shut it down. And I did. I sent the email. I forwarded when somebody finally forwarded me the crazy email they'd gotten. I forwarded it to Gmail and said, "This is not me. This is my real email, and please shut this down. I'm Shafir Loeb. I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a common name, and you can certainly search and see that that's not me."
We had an incident a couple of years back. We were down at a Miami Dolphin event, and apparently the hotel valet had parked her car, and not a biggie, right?
Copied your fob?
No. No, that really would have been something. But took our credit card information. Started using the credit card the night we were at the hotel.
How you paid for it with the credit card?
Well, yeah, and you had to have that credit card. The team had picked up the hotel, but yeah. So I don't know. It was a weird event, and the valet started charging stuff at places that Carol and I would never go. And, it was just very strange. Walked into our bank, and they said, your account is now closed. Let's open a new one. Feel free. You'll have a card in 24 hours.
Yeah.
And they did. It was that quick.
Yeah.
And they took care of it all. And they said, none of these charges will,
Yeah. And then the one who really loses in that, by the way, is the merchant.
Yeah, well, that's true, too. Yeah.
The merchant loses because they trusted the person with the card information, and they will get charged back by the bank, and they've got nowhere to turn. So they are the ones who lose when that kind of situation comes. The banks do it. They actually charge the merchant a fee for having taken a bad card. So the merchant hopefully is one that's large enough to be able to absorb that. When it's a ma and pa shop, it's rough. So there is somebody who loses in credit card theft. It's not that it's covered by insurance or anything like that. That one rides hard on the small retailer because they end up paying. They actually pay an extra fee. I know that from having been that retailer. And sometimes you've got a customer, they give you the credit card information over the phone, and you trust that it's valid, and the bank actually charges you extra because you don't have the card, so there's an added risk, and then they charge you when they charge it back. So, yeah.
A double ouch.
Yeah, double ouch. Been there, done that. I'm thinking of a $300 and some watch for which that was done.
Oh, brother.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So we ended up being out the watch and out the $300 and some.
Oh.
You can't get it back.
Yeah.
Go find the person who. Yeah. It's life. You move on.
So true.
And
So
that is
true.
part of the resilience of trauma. You move on. You move on. You recognize it. You'll laugh again. You'll smile again. Life goes on. And you're smarter, hopefully. Right. Experiences the ability to recognize the same mistake when you make it the third and fourth time.
That's me.
Hopefully you eventually get to the place where you don't quite make the same mistake, maybe a variation of it. And there becomes a problem, that theory of becoming jaded, that idea that you don't trust people. That can be a trauma response, but it's not necessarily a constructive one. There's an appropriate amount of caution that is healthy, and there's an amount that exceeds that. And the challenge after you've been traumatized is to become vulnerable, to trust people with information about you that could potentially hurt you in one way or another. And that takes being vulnerable. It takes opening up space and trusting that people won't always turn around and hurt you with it, and that you'll survive the ones that do. And that's just part of living and growing stronger. The old phrase that what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, to some extent that's true, but not always. Sometimes it can leave you limping for a long time. But we do heal. We heal in our own ways and over time. And if we've got strong people in our environment and we put people in our environment, then we can become resilient. We can learn to be more resilient. So I'm going to be talking on different times about trauma. Stay tuned. There should be a book about it coming out soon.
Whoa. Gee, why am I surprised?
Yeah.
That's your next project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's after you get about 2 or 3, 4 more degrees.
No, not going to wait that long. No,
Oh.
I'm actually working with one of my colleagues on that subject right now. So hopefully we'll have something more to tell you soon. Upcoming.
Okay, what's your definition of soon?
A few weeks.
Few weeks?
Yeah, not far away.
Are you serious?
I'm serious. It's in editing right now.
Oh my gosh.
So more about that as it comes closer.
Oh, the Rabbi, world-renowned author.
Well, not necessarily. But that's a subject that is near and dear to me because we all have trauma. We all experience trauma. We all have to learn to deal with it. And sometimes, most times, that requires somebody on the outside being willing to be that strong support for us. We're not designed to handle trauma solo. We're intended to process it, to work with it, and it doesn't mean we're not going to be sad. We're going to be sad from time to time. We're going to miss people that we've lost in our lives, whether through trauma or just moving apart or whatever. There are people we're going to miss that have come into our lives, and we enjoyed their company. And some of them will be closer and some will be farther. So trauma covers the myriad of the people we've lost, the property we've lost, the jobs we've lost, the expectations we've not fulfilled. All of those have the potential to be traumatizing. And no two of us experience the same event the same way. Because your history has a big effect on how and what that particular trauma does. It's different. Different things affect people differently. And the same thing affects different people differently because we are unique. Each one of us is precious and unique. I know I've said that before, but nowhere else on the planet is there a combination that's just like you. Even if you had a twin, that twin is still different. Even if you're identical twins. The only thing you've shared is the original pool of DNA. But how it blended and recombined, part of it depends on when the twin splits. Because depending on how the DNA has recombined up to that point.
If they're in the same environment, though, they're
in the
identical.
same womb, but they're not in the same environment.
But I mean, when they are born,
they're not in the same environment. They have each other different.
Wow. Okay.
And that can be enough. Plus, who knows which one gets which food? Because they're not going to eat identically. They're not going to see the same things as they walk down the street. And they still have their own personalities. So we are a combination. We're not defined by our DNA. We are framed by our DNA, but we are not defined by it. And what do I mean by that? The DNA gives us a framework, a set of wiring, a way to look at the world. And it is affected by the world. And so different genes within your cells light up and do things depending on what you experience. So you've got to have the material there to start or somehow learn to put it there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have whatever set of experiences you have. And they're different, even if you're in the same house. So no two siblings grow up in the same family, even twins. They're closer, but they're not identical. So if one twin develops, say, schizophrenia, the other one is at high risk for it, but may not develop it. Part of it's environmental. There's so many cases. You don't eat the same things. There's only so many drumsticks on a chicken. There are who likes what and who does what. Who likes hot dogs, who likes hamburgers. Which hot dog did you get? And there are little tiny differences that start to pile up into making us who and what we are. What foods did you... Now, obviously, twins would share the food that their mother had eaten. But I have a good friend who has a set of twins, and one twin is a special needs child, and the other one's not. So there's this combination of stuff that that's just the placement in the womb at the time caused this problem or that problem, and different things. It is, in many ways, a wild shot, a crapshoot, if we will.
It's amazing. A fellow that I worked with, he was doing Dodger radio at the time, Ross Porter. He has 4 sets of twins.
Wow.
And 3 doctors in the family.
Wow.
In those twins. It's like, oh my gosh.
So that's 8, right? That's 8.
Yeah.
And 3 of them became doctors.
Yeah.
Think about that a minute. So the other 5 did not.
True.
So
Yeah.
there's differences.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
And
Wow.
we are not cookie cutters of our parents. First of all, because we're a blend from both parents. And it's not, people think of it as 50-50. And in some ways, it is 50-50. And in other ways, it's not. What do I mean by that? So you get 50% of the genetic material from your mother, and you get 50% from your father. And they come into this bag. And it's like somebody takes the bag and goes and shakes it all up. And then the cells recombine. And so each strand of DNA will say, oh, I want that one, I want this one, I want that one. And there's this little grab bag contest going on inside your cell. And you could end up with 60% from one parent and 40 from the other because of this wild grab bag motion, the recombination of the DNA. And that is the beauty and the strength of human beings, that we have that diversity, because without that, we wouldn't adjust to the changes in the universe, in the planet. And the challenge, of course, coming back to the climate change, is whether or not we make the change so fast that we can't adapt to it. Because that's not a fast process, that recombinant, seeing which genes are successful. That's nature's way of experimenting, and every one of us is that experiment. And we have genetic knowledge for our species that no one else has. And how that forms into the trees and bushes and flowers of our species is part of the beauty of life. We are all unique. And so I've not given any genetic material into the future, but I've given a ton of other stuff. I have spiritual children, and I've affected their DNA because I've affected their experiences, their ability to cope, their ability to do this and do that. And so as people recover from their traumas in their lives, they give other gifts to others, and it is all interwoven. It's the butterfly effect. It really does make a difference where the butterfly flaps. But you have to be able to see the whole picture, which none of us can really do, because we're human. We only see the part of it that affects us. And so coming back full circle to climate change and whatever's going on, some of us will use that information to make the world better for others, and others will deny it. The healthy thing is to say, what's really happening? What can we do about it? And how do we make life better for human beings? That's the appropriate answer. One of the surprising things about climate change is that our eating habits of a high meat diet has a profound effect on climate change, as do cars, as does air conditioning. Right? We live in a world that's air conditioned. Can you imagine living here 200 years ago with our B-52 mosquitoes and everything that they represented, and no air conditioning? But the other side to that is we air condition our cars, we air condition our houses, but we're constantly opening doors and windows and letting that air escape, that cold air. And it mixes with the local air, and it does something over time. Because it's not just one door opening or one window. It's all of them. Even the swamp coolers that I love. I miss those swamp coolers.
Oh, Tucson.
I miss those swamp coolers. Big time.
Oh, yeah.
We only ran our air conditioner in June, the latter part of June, as monsoons were coming on, a little bit of July and August, and typically off by September. People don't believe me when I say that.
Not me.
Now, we turned the
See,
air
I
off.
was
'Cause
from Santa Barbara, so I mean, I was used to fog in the morning and 60 degrees.
I understand. But we loved the swamp cooler. We miss it because obviously it doesn't work in Florida. You need that single-digit humidity to make a swamp cooler work. But our windows were always open. The house smelled wonderful. The fresh air was going through the house. Turned on the house fan, and it was gorgeous. But at the other side of that, it was putting humidity out into the air in Tucson. And over time, as Tucson overdevelops, because it's overdeveloping, that's going to change the climate, both locally and globally.
There's a story last night on the Scripps News that the saguaros are burning up. And I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, you got to be kidding. And this fellow from, I can't remember what botanical garden it was in Tucson, was talking about it and saying, hey, the Saguaro National Monument is in trouble because it is so warm.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking,
they're not designed to take quite that much heat. Now, on the other hand, the two saguaros sitting in my backyard are doing quite well. They're sitting there looking at me saying, we're a saguaro, which is what saguaros spend most of their time doing until they're old enough to put flowers out, and I probably won't see that because they're not that old. But they have grown. When I first got them, they were quite small, and now they're a couple of feet high. So
wow,
they're doing well.
I never would have believed that here.
They're hoisted up so that water does not stick in their soil.
There you go.
And that's a big key, keeping them happy. Mm-hmm. Now I've got to go weed them because the weeds like it in there too. And I got to do that carefully so that the saguaro doesn't talk to me in the wrong way.
There you go.
But it is an interesting world, and we can become stronger and better and more compassionate toward each other when we learn to heal and recover from our own traumas.
So how do we find you?
We can find me on Friday nights at Congregation Eitz Chayim at our Shabbat service. It's a Shabbat dinner, by the way, tonight. And the services start at 7:30 at 295 Northwest Prima Vista Boulevard, and that's at the corner of Irving. You turn north on Irving and then pull into the parking lot at St. Andrew's Community Center.
All right. Have a good week, Rabbi.
You too. Take care, everyone. It's Rabbi Shafir Loeb for Congregation Eitz Chayim, your Jewish home on the Treasure Coast.
This is WPSL, Port St. Lucie.